In April 1861, one of the most infamous mass evictions in 19th century Ireland unfolded in the remote uplands of Glenveagh, County Donegal. Over the course of 3 days, 46 families, 241 men, women, and children, were driven from their homes. Their cabins were demolished or sealed, their livelihoods erased, and a way of life that had endured for generations was brought to a brutal end. Known ever since as the Glenveagh evictions, the event left a lasting scar on local memory. To understand how such a clearance was possible, one must examine not only the dramatic events of those April days, but also the wider climate of tension, violence, and legal power that made them inevitable. The Glen district was an isolated and unforgiving landscape of mountains, bogland, and scattered small holdings. Life here was precarious. Tenants survived by combining small-scale farming with sheep grazing and seasonal labor. Rents were low, but so were margins, and many families had occupied the land for generations under traditional communal arrangements. These customs, however, soon collided with the outlook of the estate's new owner, John George Adair, a wealthy land speculator, purchased the Glenveagh estate in the 1850s. From the outset, relations between landlord and tenants were strained. Adair was known for his rigid, authoritarian approach. He demanded fixed boundaries, controlled grazing, and strict adherence to estate regulations. Such measures directly challenged long-established communal practices, where grazing rights were shared and boundaries loosely defined. Disputes multiplied over wandering sheep, redrawn lines, and altered tenancy agreements, creating a climate of resentment and mistrust. This simmering conflict exploded in November 1860 with the murder of Adair's estate steward, James Murray. Murray was responsible for enforcing Adair's rules and adjusting holdings, and he was deeply unpopular. When he vanished and was later found dead in a river, clearly the victim of violence, the shock reverberated throughout the region. Despite an extensive investigation, no one was ever arrested. The silence of the local population, whether born of fear, loyalty, or genuine ignorance, convinced Adair that the tenants were protecting the killers. His suspicions hardened further when, shortly afterward, the house in which he was staying was set on fire in what appeared to be a deliberate act of arson. Although no one was injured, the message was unmistakable. Combined with earlier claims that he had been threatened while traveling through the mountains, Adair became convinced that Glenveagh was hostile territory. In his eyes, even those who had taken no part in violence were guilty through silence. By early 1861, Adair had reached a decisive conclusion. The district, he believed, was unsafe. The tenants were disloyal and ungovernable, and order could only be restored by removing them entirely. The murder of Murray and the attempted arson provided both motive and justification. Yet many observers noted that Adair had long harbored ambitions beyond mere security. He envisioned transforming Glenveagh into a grand private estate devoted to hunting and leisure. In that vision, scattered cabins and subsistence farmers had no place in March 1861. Adair secured a legal order from a local court granting the right to evict the occupants and take direct possession of the land. Once issued, the order left no room for negotiation. It covered a chain of townland stretching the length of the glen, from the high ground near Lochbar down toward the valley at Churchill. This was not a targeted action against a few suspects, but a sweeping clearance of an entire community. Anticipating resistance, authorities assembled overwhelming force. More than 200 members of the constabulary were deployed, reinforced by units brought in from Roscommon, Letterkenny, and elsewhere in Donegal. A resident magistrate accompanied the operation to oversee proceedings on Monday, April 8th. The sheriff and his escort set out from Letterkenny and advanced into the mountains. Their first stop was the home of Hannah McAward, a 60-year-old widow, living with her 6 daughters and 1 son. After formally taking possession, the demolition crew, known ominously as the Crowbar Brigade, set to work. As the cabin collapsed, grief and disbelief filled the air. The scene left a deep and lasting impression on all who witnessed it. Similar scenes played out across Glenveagh over the following days. Some houses were immediately torn down. Others were locked to prevent families from returning. A small number of tenants were allowed to stay on as temporary or weekly occupants, possibly because they were not suspected of any involvement in earlier unrest. A handful of elderly or disabled residents were spared eviction. But the vast majority were expelled without compensation, shelter, or means of survival. By Wednesday evening, the operation was complete. 46 families have been dispossessed. Their community effectively erased. A key to the heart of the tragedy lay Adair's uncompromising ruthlessness. The murder of James Murray and the attempted arson gave him a justification he readily embraced, allowing him to condemn an entire population rather than confront the possibility that only a few were responsible. Long-standing friction between communal tenants and a landlord obsessed with control worked in his favor. Above all, his personal ambition to create a private wilderness for his own enjoyment made the clearance not merely acceptable, but desirable. Backed by a legal system that granted landlords sweeping, almost feudal authority, Adair acted without restraint. Once his decision was made, neither law nor conscience stood in his way. In the years that followed, Adair realized his vision. On the emptied land, he constructed a vast baronial mansion, Glenveagh Castle, turning the valley into an exclusive playground for elite guests and shooting parties. The scale of the castle, set against the suffering that made it possible, cemented his reputation as Blackjack Adair, a landlord remembered for cruelty, arrogance, and vindictiveness. Though the estate later passed into new hands and eventually became part of Glenveagh National Park, local memory has never forgotten. A persistent belief endures that the castle is cursed, its foundations laid upon injustice and human misery. If you found the story compelling, please give the video a like. It truly helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe for more Irish history brought vividly to life every week.